So now we stand at a threshold, not just of discovery, but of perspective. Enceladus, a small icy moon that we once overlooked, now demands our attention, not because of its size or its beauty, but because of what it might be hiding beneath its frozen crust. The possibility of a second genesis of life. Think about that for a moment. If life emerged independently on Enceladus, in a cold, dark ocean sealed off from the surface, with no sunlight, no atmosphere, no land masses, no trees or rivers, then life is not some rare, miraculous accident. It's something else. It's inevitable when the right ingredients come together. It's universal, perhaps, a rule, not an exception, a function of physics and chemistry, not a fluke of biology. That would mean that the cosmos is not just vast, but alive with potential. It would mean that the same processes that ignited biology here, on our blue planet, orbiting an average star, could have happened countless times, in countless other oceans, under countless other skies. The implications are enormous. It would reshape biology, which currently has only one known blueprint to study: Earth. All of our understanding of life is based on a single case: one planet, one tree of life, one origin. But Enceladus might offer a second data point, a second tree, or maybe something we can't even recognize as a tree at all. Imagine this: microbial life forms that evolved entirely independent of Earth's biochemistry. Life that doesn't use DNA or that structures its cells in unfamiliar ways. Life that is truly alien, not just in appearance, but in function, in origin, and in chemistry. Even if it's just microbes, and we should expect it to be, they would still represent an entirely separate origin of life. A second genesis, one of the most profound discoveries in human history. It would confirm that the universe is capable of generating life more than once. And if it happened twice, here, within the same solar system, then how many other times might it have happened elsewhere? This is why scientists often say that discovering life on Enceladus would be more significant than discovering an intelligent civilization 100 light-years away. Because intelligence is rare. Intelligence is the product of billions of years of evolution, chance, extinction, and environmental pressure. But life, basic, microbial, chemical life, is the foundation, the first step. The real question is not, are there intelligent aliens? The real question is, how often does life begin? Enceladus offers us a place to ask that question with real data. But we must also be humble. We often imagine alien life as something we'll immediately recognize. Something swimming in that alien sea. Something that moves. Something that resembles cells or bacteria. But what if life on Enceladus looks nothing like what we know? What if it's slower? Simpler? Based on sulfur or ammonia instead of carbon and water? What if it's life, but barely? Teetering on the edge of chemistry, on the blurry line between biology and non-life. Would we know it when we saw it? And what if we found it, and it was just like us? Not identical, of course, but sharing core biochemistry. Carbon-based, using amino acids, maybe even familiar patterns in its molecules. That would raise an even stranger possibility. That life here and there are not entirely separate, that they're connected, perhaps by ancient impacts, asteroid collisions that ejected material from Earth into space, or vice versa. Perhaps life once traveled, locked inside rock, frozen for eons, and seeded across the solar system. This theory, called panspermia, is speculative, but not impossible. There is evidence that rocks from Mars have made it to Earth. Could rocks from Earth have made it to Enceladus? Or from Enceladus to Europa? Or Titan? The idea that life might travel, even unintentionally, across worlds is no longer unthinkable. And if that's true, then life might not just be common. It might be interconnected, a cosmic web, not of gravity or starlight, but of biology. And that raises deeper, more uncomfortable questions. If life exists on Enceladus, what responsibilities do we have? What if the first spacecraft to land there brings with it microbes from Earth? What if we contaminate a pristine ecosystem before we even know it's there? We talk often about planetary protection, the protocols to avoid contaminating other worlds. But these questions aren't just technical, they're ethical. If we find life, real, alien life, we must decide, do we study it, or do we protect it? Do we harvest it for knowledge, or do we leave it untouched? Do we treat it as a discovery, or as a form of life with its own right to exist? And then, there's the deepest question of all. If we're not alone, if life has emerged independently elsewhere, then what does that mean for us? Does it humble us, knowing that life is not unique to Earth? Or does it connect us, binding us to a larger biological story, a universal thread stretching across the stars? Does it make us feel smaller or larger? For millennia, we've believed that Earth was special, that we were special, the center of creation, the only home of life. But maybe life is not the exception. Maybe life is the rule. Maybe we are part of something bigger, a universe where life is not rare, but inevitable, where oceans beneath ice, warmed by tides and touched by chemistry, can give rise to something living. Enceladus may be just the beginning. Europa, Titan, Mars. The list grows. And so does our curiosity, our reach, our responsibility. The plumes of Enceladus continue to erupt silently in the darkness, like breath rising from a hidden sea. They rise into space, into the void, leaving trails of vapor and ice. Clues waiting to be read. They are not just geysers. They are invitations. Invitations to wonder, to explore, to ask the biggest question of all, and perhaps, one day soon, to answer it. And all we have to do is follow the spray. What makes Enceladus so remarkable is not just what it is, but what it represents. It is a world of paradoxes, frozen yet flowing, silent yet active, remote yet within reach. It defies the assumptions we use to hold about what a habitable world should be. For centuries, we equated habitability with Earth-like conditions, temperate climates, liquid water on the surface, breathable air. But Enceladus shatters those boundaries. It offers no sunlight, no dry land, no breathable atmosphere. And yet, it might still host life. This alone forces us to redefine the criteria for habitability. Life, it seems, does not require Earth-like conditions. It requires energy, chemistry, and stability over time. On Earth, we have found life thriving in boiling acid pools, frozen deserts, radioactive mines, and under kilometers of ocean ice. Nature has proven itself astonishingly adaptable. And if Earth's extremes can support life, then perhaps Enceladus, with its hidden ocean and internal heat, is not so extreme after all. It is easy to forget just how active Enceladus truly is. Every second, those towering plumes eject hundreds of kilograms of water vapor, organic molecules, and tiny ice grains into space. These jets are not random. They emerge from long fractures called tiger stripes, which stretch across the moon's southern pole. Through these cracks, the inner ocean breathes, venting its secrets into the vacuum. And yet, despite their spectacular nature, these plumes are also delicate, fragile, ghostly trails of vapor suspended above an alien sea. They last only moments before dispersing into the ring system of Saturn. Some of the material even falls back to the surface, creating a gentle snow that coats Enceladus in a fresh layer of frost. Others escape entirely, becoming part of Saturn's E-ring, which Enceladus actively replenishes. Imagine that, a moon creating and sustaining one of the planet's rings, all through its own natural plumbing. It's more than geology, it's artistry.